What did your teacher do that you didn't realize until you were older was fricked up? My 4th grade teacher would stand in the bathroom door and watch us pee because she said boys couldn't be trusted not to pee all over the walls and stuff. My 10th grade science teacher, a 60-year-old man who was never married and didn't have many friends, would hang out with students after school and go to student parties. He would even buy us alcohol, tobacco and marijuana. He was fired for trying to date a 15-year-old student. The music teacher at my elementary school did all kinds of creepy stuff. The one that stands out for me was that every Easter he would have us do the bunny hop, except it mostly consisted of us standing still in a bunny hop pose while he came around to inspect our tails. We knew something wasn't right about him, but as kids we didn't really understand the full extent of the creepiness. It was just something to joke about. A bunch of parents finally complained to the school about him, and shortly afterward, he moved to a different school district, supposedly because he would be able to make more money from private lessons there. Yep, he offered private and home music lessons. A friend of mine took lessons from him briefly, and apparently he insisted on absolute privacy. While the lessons were going on, the door had to be closed, and her parents weren't allowed to open it. My English teacher seemed like an ordinary guy to me in high school, only now that I'm an adult I realize he was drunk in most lessons. I heard he was fired after a few years of my graduation. After the Columbine incident, schools started to have all sorts of procedures set up in case of an active shooter incident. At my high school, we were taught if an announcement was made over the PA of a certain fake faculty member was to report to the main office. That was our cue to shelter in place and take shelter in the classrooms. Once a year we had the drill, and every time it lasted about 5 minutes. We had a teacher though that was just a little bit off. I had him for a class during 8th period of my junior year, and as time went on, the whole class kind of figured he just was a very serious, quirky kind man. On one particular day, about 10 minutes into class, he tells us all to get under our workstations because he heard the coded announcement. We all hid till the end of the period in our positions until the end of class bell rang. Our classroom was at the end of the school, and it was generally a quiet outside, so we never questioned whether this was a drill or not. This happened 2 more times during the year. We eventually just figured that he wanted to test us with his own drills. Looking back on it, and by talking to some of my former classmates, turns out he was faking active shooter drills to get the class to shut the frick up at the end of long days. When I was in elementary, my teacher wanted to show us a video about fire safety, but accidentally opened the wrong file. The whole grade of students cluelessly stared at one man and 3 girls in a hotel room for a few seconds before the teacher closed it. Grade 4 teacher spent days making our class memorize the lyrics to Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water, then had us sing it to her when she was stressed. Often multiple times a day. She was replaced a few weeks before the end of the school year. Years later we learned she had a mental breakdown, which was the reason she was replaced. She never taught again. Almost 30 years later, and I still know that song by heart. Almost 30 years. Jesus, life moves pretty fast. I had a 6th grade teacher who would choose the best behaved student of the day. Always a girl to give him a shoulder and neck rub. I was just always really jealous that I wasn't the best behaved. Super cringy Mr. B. My 5th grade teacher never let me go to the bathroom when it was apparent I had a UT. I peed my pants every time and she never said or did anything about it. In middle school, I had a math teacher talk about statistics. Somewhere in there, he said that statistically, 3 out of the 7 girls in the class will be strippers at some point in their lifetime. He even had a joke about how all the boys were probably hoping it would be Tina, the hottest girl in the class, not a real name. Everybody laughed. We were actually miffed/confused when he was fired later. Looking back, all I can say is wow, how did I miss how wrong that was. This was a Catholic paid tuition school too. I've posted this before, but still. When I was in elementary school, our pet teacher had a policy that he didn't share with us. Apparently, it was his rule that girls couldn't wear skirts when we were in the gym. If you were wearing a skirt, he would hoist it up to make sure we were wearing shorts underneath. Most girls were not wearing shorts underneath, and he knew it. He did it to the girls, myself included, from kindergarten all the way up until 4th grade. 3rd grade teacher placed all of the boys in class on timeout and had tea time with all the girls for 30 minutes once a week. His reasoning, which he told us, was that boys were mean bullies and girls are nice and should be rewarded. This is one of a dozen or so things that the parents all documented over the course of the year his first year teaching. Ultimately he was fired. In the 3rd grade we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance USA every morning before class. Then one day the teacher said that the black students in the class didn't have to get up and say the pledge because they weren't really citizens. As a white kid I was jealous of not having to do it every morning, but as an adult I think it abhorrent. Mrs. Doobie, if you're reading this, then I'm surprised you're alive, you racist sack of shoot. In 8th grade we had a unit on the Holocaust. Some students were chosen to be the Jews and had to wear yellow stars, hide during off periods, and get treated pretty shooty by other students. This was all supposed to help kids understand how horrible it all was. Didn't realize until years later how fricked up it was once I really thought about it. He had a jar of punishments for whenever you broke one of the rules. Both the punishments and the rules could be created by the students, and if you broke the rules you had to draw a punishment. Rules included everything from insulting another student, to speaking out of turn, to forgetting a pencil. The punishments all centered on public humiliation. And because it was a class of high schoolers given almost full reign, every class devolved into nothing but trying to bait other students into being punished, or convincing the teacher they needed to be. Punishments included forcing students to get on hands and knees while pushing a penny across the room with their nose and saying beep beep im a jeep, performing the highly sexual call on me dance, requiring students to scoot up and down every aisle of desks on their butt like a dog while barking the whole time, or making one kid spend an entire class at the front of the room, facing the wall, wearing a literal dunce cap. I forgot a pencil one day and had to stand at the front of the room while every student in the class balled up a piece of paper and threw it at me. One kid threw an entire notebook. I then had to crawl around on the floor and clean up all the trash. The teacher ended up getting reported at the end of the year after I and several other students complained about it unofficially to a different teacher, and while he wasn't fired the jar of punishments was gone the next year. My 4th grade teacher taught us that sound travels faster than light. A kid called Brian asked, "But don't you see the lightning before you hear the thunder?" I don't remember what her response was, but she ended with, "And that's why sound travels faster than light."
N.
My 1st grade teacher picked on a girl who couldn't read well, called her dumb and stuff. The girl was already unpopular, and I feel terrible looking back on it. At the time, though, we were all so young it was just like, well, she's an adult. I guess she can do whatever.
N.
I used to have homeroom in the morning that was overseen by one of our pair coaches. Not the stumpy middle-aged coach, the young handsome, looks like he almost made it to the majors, coach. They adored him. I mean adored him. And they would all sit on his desk and talk to him and giggle at everything he said. Some of them started doing things like playing with his hair and tugging on his clothes. Before the end of the year, he would have multiple 15 to 16-year-old girls sitting on his lap over the course of the morning. At the time I just sort of laughed it off, if not a bit jealous of, but now I realize, holy shoot. I found out a few years later, he had been fired from his previous school because he and the school nurse got caught banging in a utility closet. Not gonna lie, I'm kind of curious what ended up happening to that dude. Edit, autocorrect, she is a fickle mistress. 9th grade gym teacher told me it's okay if you sit out of running the mile. It must be hard to run with those melons. I grew up with his daughter too, so it was extra weird. I got caught with a small amount of weed at my high school while waiting for my parents to come and get me. 2 teachers talked about bending me over and spanking me. Those teachers, a couple years later, were indicted for touching students. My HS shop teacher fricked a female student. It's kinda funny, since he considered himself the moral authority anytime we used cuss words or something during class. In 1st grade we were asked what our favorite animal was. I said snake, because you know snakes are cool. The teacher looks over and goes, "Oh, you can't put snake. It's a reptile, not an animal." My geometry teacher had a Chinaman on the sun routine, where he would put a cone, reminiscent of a stereotypical Chinese hat, and tap dance in front of the class. My 6th grade math teacher was also recently arrested for exposing himself to joggers in a public park, along with a bunch of other old guys. Flasher club. I had a 2nd grade teacher, not my 2nd grade teacher, but she taught the other 2nd grade class in the adjacent classroom, who used to give students birthday spankings over her knee, and 1 spank for each year, so luckily we're only talking 6 or 7 spanks. After the final spank, you'd get a pinch to help you grow. Never got them myself, but saw it many times. At the time, didn't think much of it. Hell, kids thought it was fun. Looking back on it now, well, damn. You can bet that wouldn't fly these days. Edit. Also have no idea how the other teachers/kids thought this was okay. Mid 1990s. To provide context, had this one substitute teacher everybody knew. Was pretty strange but nothing too alarming. One day when I had him in 6th grade, he walked up behind me at my desk while I was doing a worksheet and asked if I needed help. I said I didn't, as I was almost done, but he leaned over me and started reading it anyway. After a few seconds he started telling me what a good job I was doing and began to rub my back. It made me uncomfortable and I left immediately to use the bathroom, but didn't really realize how creepy it was until a while after. I go to a private Christian school. When I was in 1st grade, my class performed the traditional Thanksgiving play, which reenacted the interaction between the Pilgrims and the Indians. If you had dark hair and dark skin, you were an Indian. If you had light hair and light skin, you were a Pilgrim. We also sang a song that goes, "Ay, Indians say yo ho," and teachers would enforce dancing like a chicken as Indian rituals. Later in the song, the Indians reply to the Pilgrims with pale face. Yes. Also had a pet teacher who used to dress up every year as a big baby, and he would hit people on the head and hit girls in the butt with his bottle. He got fired for writing love letters to students. 4th grade. Mrs. Yanaya. She read us a story about a teacher murdering their students with poison chalk, which she wrote. Had my hand slapped with a ruler because I was channeling the devil while I drew, apparently. Thought I was a sinner, so I learned to write with my right hand. Thinking back on it, super fricked up. My 2nd grade teacher was a real witch. I went to school in a not so nice part of Oz, and she was so freaking rude to everyone. I don't know how she wasn't fired. She threw erasers at people, wouldn't let us drink water bottles in the classroom if we brought them from home. Worst of all though, was this girl in our class named Gemma. Gemma was a nice girl deep down, but was very moody, most likely on account of some issues at home. One day, our teacher was in a particularly beachy mood and went through Gemma's backpack. That's where she found a spare pair of unders, likely in the event that Gemma had an issue at school, and she held them up in front of the whole class and said, "Oh, panty poos." All the boys teased Gemma for the rest of the year, and I don't recall her coming back to school after that. FCKUMEs. Ya can't. Assaulting me because I didn't kiss her. Kindergarten back in probably 1979. We had this mousy sissy spastic looking teacher who had it as policy that every kid who came into class first thing in the morning had to kiss her on the cheek. I don't even remember if I did or didn't do it that morning. I know that another kid and I in that class looked very similar. It could have been him that didn't kiss her, or it could have been me, because I don't really remember. Anyways, I was sitting in class with my back to the teacher. We had large round tables with maybe 4 kids per table when class started, and she called me out publicly in front of the class that I hadn't kissed her. I was an extremely shy child, and this was the worst thing that could have happened. The whole class attention focused on me. I basically froze and ignored her order for me to come up to her and kiss her in front of the class. I had my legs/feet wrapped around the legs of the chair I was sitting in. She got mad, stormed over to me and tried to yank me out of the chair. The chair went with me and then flew from me to loudly clatter across the floor, and I freaked out, bawling, screaming, etc, etc. She realized she fricked up big time and backed off as I continued to cry. I'm in my 40s now and can still remember it quite vividly. FCKU Mrs. Thompson. We had a teacher make us smell bleach to learn the difference between acids and bases. I got the question correct, but my brain cells paid the price. For me it was when my 5th grade teacher, during our unit on the Civil War, had us debate whether or not the South should secede. I know he was trying to get us to understand the economics of the war, but if you tell 10-year-olds to come up with reasons to justify keeping black people enslaved, they will come up with some pretty racist shit. I remember him pulling aside the one black kid in our class afterwards to ask if he was okay to tell him our classmates didn't really mean it when they said that, since black people are the color of dirt, it's okay to treat them like dirt. In grade 12, my English teacher told a student she could get out of doing an essay if she tried some extremely powerful hot sauce in front of the class. This stuff even came with a waiver form. She tried it in front of the class, face turned red, then she puked. Teacher kept his word and she didn't have to write an essay that the rest of the class still had to write. I have a photo of my 5th grade teacher with a male student from my class sitting on his lap during a sleepaway field trip. When we were sophomores in high school, I saw the teacher on the news. Had been arrested for having a 10-year-old boy passed out drunk in his apartment. When I saw that, I immediately thought of that picture, and it became much more sinister. In 7th grade, my algebra teacher got me some mints from Victoria's Secret because she knew I liked mints. I don't recall her buying anything for any of the other students. She also bent over in front of me a few times and was wearing a thong. At the time I was sorta like, hey, whatever. Now it's just kind of weird to think about. Also, my health teacher in 9th grade said that men couldn't be raped. Though this one I did realize was fricked up, and I almost flunked the class because I refused to listen to a word she said the entire rest of the time. I grew up in a very rough neighborhood, projects, public assistance, etc. In middle school music class, we had plastic xylophones without mallets, so we used our pens. Anyway, we had that cool teacher who you later learn isn't so cool. If 2 students had an issue, he would have them stand across from each other in the middle of the room and basically have a diss battle, trading your mama jokes for the rest of the period. Oh, also, if a student was getting bullied he would join in and crack jokes on the kid. I knew it was fricked up even then, but now that I'm an educator myself it's freaking mind-blowing. I was in 1st grade and my teacher consistently wouldn't give me the same things as the other students. I distinctly remember her passing out glow-in-the-dark vampire teeth for Halloween and she refused to give me one. She said it was because I didn't nap and was playing a possum. If she ever handed out candy, I never got any. I was a chubby kid so I'm pretty sure that was the reason. 9th grade I had a teacher move me directly next to his desk so he could talk to me during class. He did this to every girl who had big bobs. He would constantly walk by and check my work if I had a semi-low cut shirt on. I was back from spring break in high school and previous to that I had a suicide attempt. All my teachers were made aware of the situation, so arrangements could be made to help me with school while I was coping. During independent study in science class I was wearing one of my long-sleeved uniform shirts that had crept slightly, exposing a bit of my wrist. Nobody noticed until my teacher walked by and grabbed my arm and pulled my sleeve up and loudly said, while examining my mutilated forearms, "Wow, where did all this come from?" He knew what happened. That's how my peers found out too. My grade 6 teacher read Chicken Soup for the Preteen Soul, specifically the parts about shopping for a new bra, getting your first period and all other female puberty related stories to the entire class almost on a daily basis. This doesn't sound terrible on its own, but he was 35 plus and was later disciplined by the board for inappropriately contacting his 11-year-old female students, calling them on their home telephones and asking them sexual questions about their period, French kissing, etc. My younger sister had a teacher who thought improper fractions couldn't be simplified. I believe she was a 3rd grade teacher, but she teaches high school now. Those poor kids. I mean, she literally thought they couldn't be simplified. Like 6 over 12 equals 1/2, but 48 over 12, you were stuck there. I went to a tiny private school from my 2nd grade year to the 8th, and 6 of those years were spent in the same intermediate classroom with nobody my age. This class was taught by the director of the school, and her idea of teaching was read it in the book and figure it out. The only thing she did was grade papers and write notes on the board for us to copy. If I asked for help in math, she'd hand me a piece of chalk and tell me to go to the board. I'd stand up there all day, sometimes on the same lesson for up to a week. She expected every single page in the textbook to be done at the end of the year, and thus, I was still in my 7th grade math book halfway through 8th grade. She never helped, never explained, just sent me to the chalkboard and accused me of not trying. If I asked to get a drink of water, she'd accuse me of procrastinating, but then turn around and tell me I didn't drink enough and that I was hurting my kidneys. Here's the kicker. Before I went there, I was tested at my old school and was determined to be a gifted student, however that works. By the time I made it out, it'd fallen so far behind it took 2 years of high school to claw my way back to average. In the 4th grade, we did a unit on slavery in the Americas and how bullshit it was. Each of us spent a day as a slave and a day as a master. I specifically remember at that age understanding that it was unfair and had my slave do petty shoot like grab my bag when he was already up to grab his and other trivial things. The girl that was my master trashed her desk and told me to clean it right before we were supposed to go to gym or something, and then punished me for not finishing her desk. The teacher's take on the subject? C. Slavery wasn't fun or fair. I had to miss recess for a week for arguing about it being unfair. Junior kindergarten teacher told me I couldn't play with a certain toy because I couldn't count to 10. I could in fact count to 100, but I figured she's a grown up and a teacher, so I must not be able to count to 10 because she says so. The fricked up part, why didn't she take 30 seconds of her life and teach me how to count to 10? If she thought I couldn't count to 10 and I needed that skill to play with the coveted toy, that's a teachable moment right there.